Welcome, everyone. We're going to give a couple more minutes for everyone to join, and then we'll get started. Hello, everyone, and welcome to today's webinar, HR Getting a Seat at the Strategic Table and Making It Count. We're excited to have you with us today, and a few housekeeping notes before we get started. Today's conversation should probably run about 60 minutes, including a Q&A section if time permits. And please submit your questions anytime using the Q&A box, and we'll cover as many as we can before we wrap up. A recording of today's session, along with the slides, will be shared with you afterward. And don't forget, all attendees that are eligible to receive 1 SHRM credit if you stay with us for 50 minutes or more. We'll provide details on how you can claim that following the session. Let me give you a quick introduction of MP before we get started. MP offers a full human capital management platform, payroll, time, benefits, recruiting, performance management, everything you'd expect from the big box providers. But what makes MP different is the service and the expertise. We deliver that white glove support, 100% on time and headache-free implementation, and dedicated team of SHRM certified professionals like the speakers we have today who partner with you beyond just technology. We prefer the proactive approach, and we help businesses of all sizes not only run payroll, but also solve real compliance and HR challenges before they get hit with fees. Now, let's meet your speakers. We have Melissa Brown, a people relations manager here at MP, and Melissa is a seasoned HR executive with over 2 decades of leadership experience, primarily in the not-for-profit sector. She's passionate about developing people and building workforce programs that help leaders reach their full potential. Jen Saray is a senior HR partner here at MP, and Jen brings deep expertise from her work managing HR from the Northeast Division of a national nonprofit. She loves building relationships with clients and helping them achieve their HR goals. Meg Olivastri is a senior HR partner at MP, and Meg is an experienced HR professional with a strong background in strategic HR, talent management, employee relations, and benefits. And she has a proven track record of helping organizations align people strategy with business success. So we know that for many HR professionals, being seen as strategic rather than a transitional is still a challenge. So today, our goal in this chat is to give you some practical tools and examples to help you not only earn your seat at the strategic table, but also make it count once you're there. So let's jump right into this. We're going to start off with Melissa. We have a great question for you. HR is sometimes unfairly seen as compliance only. How can HR leaders reframe their role as a driver of business outcomes?
Yeah, Katie, that's a actually great question to kick us off, because in my world, HR should be strategic, right? Our goal is to drive our operation from a support model, somebody there in a supportive role, cost center, right, to becoming that strategic partner. And we have to do that by shifting HR to strategy. So instead of talking about things like policies and compliance and process, those things are all really, really important. But we have to shift our thinking and frame HR initiatives in terms that executives and leaders care about, right? We're running businesses. What do people care about? Revenue, cost, risk, growth. That is the things that HR has to think about and bring to the table. And before we can do any of that, the most important ingredients that we need to do as HR professionals is and shifting that mindset is really building good relationships, having that established credibility, really knowing the business, knowing the goals, the operations inside out. You have to build a really good business acumen. Without that, you'll be seen as that, cost setter, the just providing compliance, which again is all equally important. But really the magic in HR is when you shift it to strategy, and you can really just build a lot better business and have better outcomes if you're there proactively and offering that perspective in a way that the executive and managers care about. So just a quick example, right? Recruiting isn't just about filling this position, right? We need that. Those of us that have managed operations know that we really want to fill those positions. A lot of times managers want to do it pretty quickly. But really what I want us to think about as HR professionals is reducing vacancy costs, right? We do have to fill a position, but we're actually looking at this now in a way that executive level and those driving strategy at your organizations care about. What is the cost of that vacancy? What is that impact to our customer service? How is this driving revenue? Because this team is so stretched thin. Those are the answers and the things that you want to think about and how you want to present it. So we can move from that back office function to just being reactive when somebody's ready to say, here's your rec. I need this position, go hire it, right? Or on the opposite end, we need to offboard this person. You're now taking a holistic approach and you're framing those initiatives in terms of business impact. And that is really where the shift in HR comes. We have to be business leaders and have that acumen.
Yeah, so executives definitely care about ROI, risk, and growth. So, what advice do you have for HR leaders on translating HR goals into like executive values?
Yeah, it's really about speaking that language of the C-suite, right? The executives, the ones who are leading that strategy of our business. So again, we can say as HR professionals or practitioners that we have this 20% turnover number. What does that mean? What does that mean to anybody that is not in HR? Right? Is that a good number? Is that a bad number? We have no idea. The impact becomes really different when you're going to that business unit leader or the C-suite saying, guys, we're losing $1.2 million annually in all the replacement and training costs. That is going to get someone's attention whose sole job is to grow, right, and have strategy and make sure that our business is running successfully. And a tip I use is always coming to that table with solutions. I can tell you as a former CHRO, I had the pleasure of being able to revamp, rebuild lots of teams. And the one thing I always said was, I really trust my people. I lean into them. I want to come with solutions, not just problems. So, to all my fellow HR professionals out there, executives don't want to hear what's broken. They want to know how we're going to fix it. So, I prepare every conversation with three buckets in mind: cost, risk, and benefit. What is this going to take financially? What's going to go wrong if we don't act or have this intervention come or this HR strategy come? And what's the payoff to the business? Put a one pager together, something that outlines things like the problem. Don't forget that data. That data is so important. You have to have metrics and things and numbers that people can react to, right? So we can't just go on a gut feeling that we feel this thing or we feel that the staff is feeling this way because it was cited in exit interviews. Bring that data, bring the percentages, bring the trend, then bring your solution. Maybe you're piloting a workload redistribution, or you want to target a leadership development course, right? Bring that projected impact by saying things like, we can reduce turnover by 10%, saving almost $200,000 in replacement costs. That way, you're not just raising a concern, you're bringing a solution and you're talking about the savings to the business. So, leading with data, using those metrics, and really turning our language into what that leadership team is going to care about. What is the cost? What is the impact? What is that benefit?
Awesome. Already giving out some really strong strategies. Um, so how else can HR build credibility so that when they do walk into the room, the leaders are listening?
Yeah, so I will say, I did not, study HR as a career or profession since I was fresh out of high school. It was something many of us adapt to. We kind of fall into these positions. But, when I did decide that this was my passion and I wanted to study and I was really curious about things, my frustration was right. Like, okay, why aren't they listening? Right? Like, I have all this data. We know what we're talking about in HR. Well, that strategy isn't going to work, right? You have to have that credibility before you even enter that room. So even as a very seasoned HR person, whether I'm working with clients or working here at MP or at former companies, I focus on building that credibility. And that does not happen when you're trying to pitch a new strategy or intervention. You earn that really by delivering on the fundamentals. So that means you understand compliance. You're proactively making sure that your organization is compliant in all things HR. Your payroll is accurate. Your benefits are working. The basic stuff and the operational stuff in HR has to help build that trust. And then it's up to you as the HR professional to build those relationships. Spend time with the leaders, spend time understanding their business, what keeps them up at night. Be visible outside of HR. You have to walk the floor. You have to understand the business. You have to get to know your leaders. So they start seeing you as a partner and not just this function, right? Or in some cases, probably an irritant when we tell them, you got to slow down and do things different. So, really building that credibility is fundamental. That should be the first thing on your mind. Do I have the credibility? What do I need to learn? What do I need to anticipate that the business needs? Am I bringing solutions or am I bringing more problems? And most importantly, am I aligning all these HR interventions with the strategic plan the company has in place? And that is really a huge part of this. HR practitioners and professionals, we cannot run silo. You have to understand where the business is going, what the strategy is, and then how our role as HR professionals fit into helping drive that. So invest the time, one-on-one relationships, sit in their meetings, understand how they run their business. It really will make a difference in building some of that credibility before you even walk into that room.
Yeah, amazing. So we actually did just have a question come in through the Q&A.
Okay,
If you're open to answering it, it's
sure.
you mentioned the importance of credibility, delivering on the basics first. For HR leaders who feel like they're already doing that, what's the next step to actually shift into being seen as strategic?
Oh gosh, yeah, the million-dollar question, right? And I will say it's time and timing, and these things take time. And we can't be afraid to fail. I can tell you, I'll raise my hand, be the first one, failed a lot of times trying to be passionate or too quick or, I'm reacting. And so, at a former company, I was um tasked with taking over the HR function, right? And so after I probably picked myself off the floor and laughed a little bit, I was like, okay, yeah, we got this. This is about people, right? And the first thing I found is we're being super reactive. The team fixed problems. We were updating policies. We were putting out the rules. We were firing people. And I was like, nobody is coming to see HR. Not one person wants to come meet with us proactively, right? So I just started sitting in and listening on meetings, on operation meetings, on department meetings. I listened to the managers. I reviewed the feedback that was coming in. And then I noticed, some of the leaders were really worried about missing quarterly targets. And the reason was because there was so much turnover in our call center, right? And it was slowing down fulfillment and all these things were happening. So I had to step back and it gave me a chance to really connect the dots. Instead of going in and presenting HR metrics like, our customer service turnover is 22%. I really went in with scripted notes and translated and said, this turnover is costing 1.2 million annually in delayed orders. We're losing revenue opportunities. Things aren't going on the door on time. Our customers are unhappy. Our customers are not being retained. And so really what I did was say we have to target things like onboarding and career pathing. But before I even brought that up as an intervention, the key to making this work, the number one winning strategy for me has always been connecting business leaders. You as an HR professional are there to help facilitate collaborative ownership, working together, connecting the business units, seeing how they overlap and have to work with each other, having tough conversations. Our job in HR is to tell the leaders, right, the tough things that may be going on, that we have to look for and maybe act differently. So if we don't do that, right, people are working in silos. We don't understand each other's businesses. We're complaining. So HR is about facilitating, bringing together the parts of the business that may, not be working or have a little, um, you know, tense moments and saying, let's come together, facilitate this, figure out solutions, because we have to for our people. And then coming with that business acumen, you're actually bringing facts and data into it with the business leader owners, who also know their business and have that expertise. So I would just say a lot of relationship building, a lot of collaboration, a lot of not giving up. But really at the heart of what we do is we have to have courage. You can't be afraid to have tough conversations and present things that may not be always favorable, to the business units.
Yeah, amazing. So correct me if I'm wrong, but timing seems to be a theme in your approach. Can you expand on that at all?
Yeah, so this is, you asked me one thing where I may have failed and learned. This is it. I am eager. I'm passionate. I want to get things moving. I want to fix things. Like HR people are natural problem solvers. But absolutely, timing is everything. I have been the one that went in before there was problems and said, "Hey, we got to do all these things," right? Because they're textbook HR things. I soon very learned that people don't care about those textbook HR things until it becomes a problem for them. So leaders are really most open to HR influence during inflection points. Is there a merger and acquisition? Are we trying to scale a business? Are we growing a business? Do we have to cut costs? Are we feeling some challenges around our culture? Are there really big regulatory changes that are going to impact the business? So when we think about that as strategy and how HR can step in those moments, we're bringing solutions and we're bringing them in a flexible way that's ROI driven. At that point, they're going to pull you into the conversation. You don't even have to ask for that seat at the table because you're helping them solve problems. So really think about the time, right? If it's not a priority for that business or that business leader, you can talk to your blue in the face. They are going to be focused on the things that are important to them, which is growing that business. So timing is definitely a key part of this.
So we actually just had another question come in, and I want to
Okay.
remind everyone, if you do have questions, drop them in the Q&A. We'll try and get to them as they come in, or we'll get to them at the end if possible. But another question came in. Can you give an example of how you adjusted your approach or waited for the right moment and it made all the difference in whether leaders took HR's recommendations seriously?
Ooh, that's a good question. So I think the thing that stands out to me the most, it's really a few years ago. I was not at MP, so there's my disclaimer. In one of my past lives, and really wanted to push for a better, more robust leadership development program because really what I saw, not only as a executive leader, and heard and listened to the people and the employees and my staff, managers were really struggling with engagement and turnover. And I, do the typical put your survey out. We look at things, right? And um, we were right in the middle of having to reduce costs. We were federal and state funded. We had a lot of cost cutting happening. We couldn't retain people. The appetite was not there for me to come in and say, "Hey guys, I know we're trying to reduce all of our costs, and I know our leaders are stressed out. Let's bring them a mandatory leadership development program that they have to participate in." That just became one more thing on their plate, right? I got no buy-in from managers. They're like, "Melissa, you want me to do what? I am trying to fill seats. I'm trying to work the business. I'm trying to grow the business, right?" So I took a step back and I said, yeah, this is not going to work, right? So I really wanted to wait till quarterly results came in. I studied overtime costs, the labor spike costs, how much turnover we were having, both at the leadership level, at the individual level. And that moment when leaders were frustrated and they wanted to have solutions because the results weren't there at the end of the quarter, I then came in and reintroduced a leadership development proposal that would give them time to help me with coaching, right? And I solved that as a cost saver because I said, investing $100,000 in management development can prevent $450,000 in vacancy overtime and replacement costs because I did that work and I wanted to know where that data was going to impact the business. Because the timing matched, I had the right proposal and the right data, right? We ended up being able to put a pilot out there, and it grew from there. So it really is about critical timing and knowing when to bring that solution. And that takes time, it takes practice, takes a lot of failing.
That was a great question. Great response.
Yes, it's tough out there.
Amazing. So, last question, Melissa, I
Sure,
promise.
that's
What's
okay.
one piece of advice you'd give HR leaders who want to elevate their influence?
Yes. Well, we talked about credibility, right? We talked about building those relationships, but really the work has to come with you. Elevate that presence. Confidence and executive presence matter just as much as the content that you're telling them, right? So having sharp data points, following it up with a compelling story are just as effective as a 15-page slide deck that you want to go in on in a leadership meeting and present, right? So show up, be prepared, know your numbers, know the business, speak the language, get that human story in there. That's really what what resonates. And you're not going to be able to bring all of that if you're sitting idle behind your computer, right? Or not learning about the business, not forming the relationships, not having that business acumen. And then the last thing I will just say is it's really important for us to elevate our own presence, by being agile. We can't be really rigid. Like, no, that is not how HR works, right? Or no, that is against this law. We all know as HR professionals, sometimes we have to get a little gray. And our flexibility and our agility will help to build that credibility, will help us to be able to, elevate yourself in a space that seems kind of chaotic, right? Where the answers seem clear to us, but the other leaders are having a hard time figuring it out. So come confident, come prepared, speak in ROI business terms, and the leaders will notice how you deliver and what you deliver. You don't have to sell it if you're just naturally used to operating that way, and keep practicing at it.
Amazing. So Melissa gave some really incredible strategies for earning your seat. Now we all know that earning the seat is only the first step. So once you're at the table, the real challenge is making sure your contributions influence decisions. So let's turn to part two, making it count. And we're going to hand it over to Meg. And Meg, a question to throw it to you is executives don't just want policy execution, they want guidance. How can HR move into the role of trusted advisor?
Oh, absolutely. So thank you, Melissa. All of that is great. And I feel like this is just a perfect segue into talking about this piece of being that trusted advisor. I absolutely love that idea, strategic partner, trusted advisor. And for all of you out there who already have MPHR partners, like one of us, I feel like we talk about this a lot till we're like blue in the face. We talk about this with our clients, and we are really executing this with all of our clients as well. And it's really the heart of this conversation is becoming that trusted advisor. And being that trusted advisor, it means you're not just carrying out the tasks like Melissa was talking about. I feel like a lot of what we're going to talk about now is just kind of echoing the very tangible things that Melissa was giving us, because you're actually shaping the thinking behind those decisions. So if you think about a time, a leader came to you with a request, and this probably happens a lot. Did you simply just kind of carry it out exactly as told? Or just like Melissa said, are you asking those questions that are actually influencing how we're all moving forward with that task? And that's the shift that we're going to be talking about. So instead of saying, no, that's against policy, or even on the yes side, even yes, we can do that, but then that's it. A trusted advisor is actually going to be asking, what's the potential impact on morale? Will this decision help or hurt retention? How will this affect our employer brand and reputation? A lot of questions like that just kind of keep the wheels turning and keep us thinking. It's about anticipating any of the consequences, it's offering alternatives and broadening our leaders' view.
So that's a lot. That's a lot to take in. So can you share an example?
Yeah, absolutely. So imagine a leader wants to roll out a stricter attendance policy. That's, when we hear this all the time, and it's totally valid. Unexcused absences are absolutely a thing that comes up all the time, especially for us. As an individual contributor, HR might just, you take down the notes, what they want, we draft it, we send it back, we then send it out, and kind of off we go. But as a trusted advisor, I would really want to take a step back and probe a little bit more. So I might say, let's talk through how this is going to affect engagement, or what else could we try that addresses the issue without damaging trust from staff. And then, one of my favorites is always talking about win-wins. So what's the win-win for us and the employees with this new policy? And by thinking this through further, we also can use this as the talking points when we're rolling out the new policy to really help sell it and build confidence with the staff. So absolutely, that's the difference. It's not just saying yes or no. It's really thinking about some of those further questions. You're not just delivering what's asked of you. You're really helping. You're helping and supporting your leaders to see kind of around these corners that they might have blind spots for. And then, and Melissa kind of spoke about this too, and I want to reiterate it, is that something that's really critical and can be so tough to do as you're kind of getting used to all of this and building that confidence, that trust, and getting that seat. Trusted advisors ask tough questions. But respectfully, but we absolutely ask tough questions. You're building credibility, not conflict. And executives and leaders actually value that candor when it's framed as partnership. So I'm going to put that to, we're talking about examples. I'm going to put that into kind of another real life scenario. So say a leader comes to you and says, we need to cut costs. Let's freeze. Sorry, Melissa, I'm going to do the opposite of what you were hoping for. Let's freeze all professional development programs for the next year. Now, as that individual contributor, again, you could just send out the memo. Like, sorry, everyone, we're not doing any more professional development for the rest of the year. We're going to cancel all your trainings and, too bad for you, but we have to do that. But as a trusted advisor, you're going to take that step back and you're going to say, to that leader, I understand the need to control expenses. At the same time, could I share some concerns about how this could impact retention and morale? Or if employees see us pulling back on development, it might send the message that we're not investing in them. Development is super important to these next generations coming in. That might make it harder to keep some of these top performers that we're really looking to succeed with us over the long term. Or, could we look for some alternatives, like focusing on maybe low-cost mentoring programs or online learning instead of bringing in the in-person trainer, and instead of just cutting development entirely, can I take a peek at that? And so instead of, just saying no, we can't do that, we acknowledge the business concern, which is so important. And just like Melissa was saying, kind of echoing that again, that's front of mind for our leaders, is that business concern. So, we're introducing kind of the broader implications of these concerns and what those corners, those blind spots might be that they're not seeing. And then you offered alternatives. And that's absolutely that trusted advisor behavior. So the framework that I like to think about, especially, when we might need to be disagreeing and we're trying to build credibility as a trusted advisor, we absolutely want to acknowledge the leader's goal. So I hear that cost control is a priority. And I'm with you. Like, I've seen the numbers, just as Melissa said, you were in those meetings, you're hearing what about the numbers, also. So I hear that cost control is a priority. We want to introduce the bigger picture. So let's think about how this impacts engagement and retention and our staff at a bigger level here, and offer those alternatives or adjustments. So what if we scale down instead of cutting completely? And it's also okay that, you don't have an answer right away, and ask for time. And that's also okay. I hear you today that we need to do this, or you're sitting in the meeting and you kind of hear murmurings that we want to cut all development programs. You say, I hear that this is a priority. We absolutely need to do this. I would really like some time to think about how we might have some alternatives to scale this down instead of just cutting it completely. Can we revisit this in a few days? I would really like the opportunity to think of some solutions here. So that way, you're not blocking the idea, you're just enriching it and really helping to pivot and to kind of keep finding that win-win for really everybody, the leaders in the organization itself, but then also the staff. And again, leaders may not always take your recommendation, but they absolutely will respect your perspective. And over time, that's going to build that trust, influence, and confidence.
I think I'm going to make a big wallpaper for everyone that says, you're building credibility, not conflict. Like, I'm going to take that quote. That's what I'm going to use
I love
now.
it.
Oh, that's amazing. No, that was so good. So here's a real challenge for HR. You're expected to be the protector of the business and the voice of employees. Meg, how can HR leaders wear both hats effectively? And what does that look like in high stakes situations like a termination?
Oh my gosh, that is it's such a good question. And I feel like I'm always talking about that. HR is such a unique function in an organization. We have this really kind of high level seat at the table, hopefully, and that's where we're all getting everybody who's listening here too. But we have this high level seat at an organization, but we're also the advocate for all of the staff. And it's this wild balance that we carry as HR professionals. And we wear these two hats. So we very much want to protect the business. So we're making sure we're compliant, financially sound, we're minimizing risk. But then in the supporting employees hat, we want to make sure that they're engaged, they're valued, they're heard, they're treated fairly, they're growing, they're developing, they're staying with us, they're becoming the next generation of leaders. It's a very interesting place that we're in. And the real art of being a trusted advisor is recognizing that you absolutely can't ignore either of them. You have to find a way to wear both of these hats at once, which seems completely unreasonable, but we absolutely can do it. And, the reality is that, and like I said before, not every recommendation we make is going to be picture perfect. And sometimes the ideal solution for employees isn't feasible for the business. And sometimes the lowest risk option for the business can be very hard on employees. For those of you, if anyone's on the call that works with me day to day, I'm always talking about we have our option A here that's super conservative, very low risk, but it's going to take a lot more time to get there. It might take more money. It might make more time administratively, a burden on managers. But here's option B, like Melissa said, that, we're going to touch into the gray area here a little bit where the business might be a little more risk, but it's going to be a little bit easier. So certainly there's absolutely that balance. And that's where that creativity and credibility is absolutely going to come in. So kind of going back to our previous example, imagine leadership wants to eliminate a benefit because it's too costly. So again, kind of tale as old as time there. Employees will feel that loss so deeply. So as HR, you might want to say something like, I understand the financial pressure and I agree we need to be mindful of costs. At the same time, eliminating this benefit could absolutely damage morale and retention. What if we look at a scaled back version instead? Or can we phase it out gradually while we're introducing maybe a different lower cost perk just to kind of soften the impact? And then again, if you need more time, which is okay, because sometimes these things, if you're sitting in on meetings, are going to surprise you. So if you need more time, you just say something like, if I can have a few more days, I'd love to see if I can flesh out some of the different options further. And then I'd like to revisit this again in a few days and bring you some of those options. So again, we're acknowledging the company's need, but you've also kept the employee experience in the room, which is, you're kind of sliding that in there because that's what we're doing as HR is pulling that employee hat on, where leaders and executives are really thinking about the business. And that's what they're supposed to be doing. They are supposed to be wearing that hat. So that's where we come in and can really bring that employee experience into the room. And this is so important when speaking with leadership also, because again, I encourage all the HR people that I work with, don't wait until you have the perfect answer before you speak up. Bring forward, your best recommendations. Use those tools that Melissa was just talking about also, especially if you're really, really ingrained in the business and the operations. You're going to have those front of mind already to at least have the right business acumen to bring forward, showing those trade-offs, being transparent about where it might not check every box. And that's okay. You're building credibility and trust. And it's okay to kind of make those mistakes and need to pull back and ebb and flow and just and take that time. That honesty in all of those types of conversations as you're fleshing those things out is actually going to build trust. So I think to this of, my responses and situations with this kind of general mindset is I hear your concerns and what you're saying. Here's what I think is the best path forward. It's not flawless, but it balances risk, cost, our commitment to employees, and I'm open to exploring it further and getting you some more information. So that's just kind of like the baseline framework that I like to use when talking with leadership and executives, especially if there's something that I might be disagreeing with a little bit. And that's absolutely going to make you a thought partner. You're not just protecting the company or just advocating for employees, because leaders will call you out if they think you're only advocating for employees. I've certainly been in that situation myself in previous lives. So your job really and your focus is finding that middle ground that absolutely serves both, finding those win-wins. And in the process, you're also going to be demonstrating exactly why HR deserves a seat at the table.
So I think that balancing act you just described perfectly describes HR as a strategic partner and trusted advisor of trying to protect the business while supporting employees. In fact, we just had a question come in about the word nobody likes to talk about, the T word nobody likes to talk about, terminations.
Oh, yeah.
Leaders often come in ready to make a quick call, but HR has to navigate both sides thoughtfully. Meg, how do you approach these conversations as a trusted advisor?
Oh my goodness. Leaders certainly come to HR with very strong decisions. Talk about a tale as old as time. Show of hands for everybody. This person isn't working out. We need to terminate today. How many times have you heard that from one of your leaders? I've certainly heard that from many of my clients as well. And it's absolutely valid because we get to that point and we want to just kind of be done and we want it to be clean and done and no more. So now our role as individual contributors, if we were just that, would be to process the paperwork. We're just like, okay, sure, we got to get rid of this person today. Let's go do it. here's the things, we got to process paperwork, just make it happen. Signed, sealed, delivered. But as trusted advisors, we are going to slow down. We're going to take a step back. We're going to bring balance into that conversation. And all of us, on this panel certainly have a lot of experience with this, and I'm sure a lot of you listening do too. So you might say something like, I hear your concerns, and I absolutely agree that performance has been an issue. And we need to do something. Before we move forward, I just want to weigh the risks here in thinking about this full situation. Do we have the documentation to support this decision? Have we given the employee a chance to improve? We also might want to make a note to discuss kind of the internal PR of certain decisions by saying something like, what message will this send to the team if it feels really sudden? And then on the other side, remember, kind of, we're wearing multiple hats. So we're also looking at the employee support hat. And you might add something like, also something to consider, they just got back from parental leave with their first child and have been readjusting. We could be in that, the ebb era of ebb and flow of their engagement due to this like super huge life change. So since we haven't spoken to them about problems with performance in the past, what do we think about trying a conversation first? Throw it out there. Let's see what sticks, and see what we can try. But it's bringing these things forward that leaders and executives might not be thinking about. Maybe some of them aren't even privy to it. Maybe it's someone who's, in a different department and they're just not really thinking about the fact that this person just came back from a really, really big, important leave that they had, and they are readjusting back into the workforce. So sometimes the recommendation you bring forward is not the perfect solution. For example, you might also suggest, and for some of my clients on here, you're gonna be like, oh, I know this, a performance improvement plan as a middle ground. It absolutely protects the company by building documentation and demonstrating fairness within, a very specific time frame that we can customize for you, and it has an end date, which leaders are gonna love to see, right? They wanna know they have this problem, they want it gone today. There's a lot of risk to make it go away today. So how can we have that win-win? As HR, we're like, we really love to see documentation. So we get our PIP, but then leaders want that end date. So we're like, it's going to be 30 days. We just need, give me 30 days and we'll talk about that. So, and then it also supports the employee. So here's that second hat by giving them a really structured chance to improve, turn that around, and hopefully they do. That's the whole goal of these performance improvement plans. We don't need to end in termination. But if termination is still the right outcome, because it might be after we are kind of fleshing this out with our leaders and we're talking about all the right questions, looking around all the dark corners, then we're going to be guiding leadership to understanding those potential risks. Should there be, no documentation, for example, how to handle it with compassion, clear communication, giving dignity to the employee, working on the internal PR, and then, any resources if possible, that low-hanging fruit. We want to make sure that we're really good on final pay laws, termination notices, unemployment notice requirements, any of those things that's absolutely low-hanging fruit in any wrongful term lawsuit. We want to make sure, and that's where our compliance brains come in, and we can be those trusted advisors to make sure that we're checking all those boxes. So absolutely, and leadership is going to value that balance where sometimes we're going to maybe push back a little bit more and have that little bit of that, conflict, but we're doing it respectfully and we're getting our point across with a lot of data, as Melissa said, and things like that, and really fleshing out all those things. So we're talking about that balance, but then also it's okay that sometimes we just need to be done with this employee at this point. It's negligent retention. How are we going to do this the right way and be that trusted advisor for them?
Such a good example, Meg. Terminations are never easy. Wearing two hats can never be easy. But at HR, when you balance it all, protecting the company with caring for people, it can reduce risk. It strengthens trust in the leadership. So it can be a win-win for everyone too. So thank you, Meg. Amazing job. So we've heard from Melissa how to frame HR as a business driver, and now from Meg to position HR as a trusted advisor. So Jen, you are up. Let's talk about the role of data. How can HR use metrics to strengthen credibility with leaders?
Awesome. Thank you, Katie. And, great question. I just love how this all kind of ties back to where Melissa started and then Meg took us, what they shared. Melissa talked about reframing HR work in business terms. As she said, data is one of the fastest ways to do that. We know numbers get leaders' attention. When you can show them that those turnover rate in dollars or time metric merit increases directly to performance metrics, it really just moves the conversation beyond those gut feelings that our leaders might want to be, acting on into that measurable business impact. And Meg emphasized helping leaders slow down, think through those decisions before acting. And data is a great tool for that. It helps us test assumptions, bring attention to any blind spots that aren't on their radar, and ensure decisions are defensible, especially when it comes to sensitive issues like pay, succession planning or layoffs and things like that.
Yeah. So can you share some examples of the types of decisions where data really changes the conversation?
Absolutely. And I think there are a few different types of examples I can share where data can make all the difference. The first one I want to highlight is in terms of like pay decisions and equity. Pay equity analysis doesn't just flag issues, it helps us tell the story behind our pay philosophy. Are discrepancies explainable by seniority, performance, or location? Or do we have pay compression or inequity issues that could, really create some risk for the organization? And I think leaders really appreciate that we're not just guessing, we're using real evidence to guide compensation strategy. And this is where, I think salary benchmarking data is a powerful tool too. It can show you how, our pay stacks up against the market. You can justify adjustments or defend current practices. Our HR team, I can probably speak to, we work in this stuff quite a bit, especially when we have states where pay transparency laws are passing and just increasing how they're popular in some newer states. So we have access to salary benchmarking reports that really, drill down to industry, company size, location, and we've been helping our clients leverage this data to inform their pay practices. And it's really helpful. We can have, all this powerful data in one spreadsheet and see what story the data really tells and how we can use that to influence leaders to make choices that protect the business and employees, that managing that balance, right? Another big one that I think we've touched on a little bit before in this conversation is performance management, merit increases. When budget decisions are made during reviews, we can help leaders tie increases to measurable performance ratings. And that way, the process is seen as consistent, fair, and defensible. It also reduces the risk of issues later if an employee challenges a termination or claims bias. And for our clients that are on our iSolve platform, using that HCM platform, we can help them build out their performance reviews in the system, and we can create in kind of overall ratings that can be tied to increased percentages. So I think when you can help leaders take the emotion out of the performance review process and replace it with structure, you're really helping to set the company up for success by reducing liability and employee morale issues. That kind of leads into my next example, talking about succession planning with a 9-box tool. And this is one of my favorites really because it's visual data that leaders can grasp quickly. The 9-box, for those who might not be familiar with it, it maps employees by performance and potential, which helps leaders see future bench strength and development needs kind of at a glance. But, and this is important, it only works if you have solid metrics in place to justify placement on that grid. So the performance access should be backed by objective review ratings or goal achievements, not just that manager's gut feelings about a person that they're just not good at their job, or they're just not, they're not meeting my expectations, right? Well, prove it, show me. And the potential access should be tied to defined competencies or leadership assessments. Not just, I think they could be good someday. I think they could, be a manager someday. So the 9-box is powerful, but only when it's grounded in real data. And it can be a tool to help you have those conversations and kind of keep managers in check just from making, again, those gut decisions about who should be a leader and who shouldn't be. And the last one I'll just touch on is the benefit of data when it comes to layoffs or restructuring. And I think, these difficult moments, data protects both the company and employees. Using a decisional matrix that factors in measurable criteria like seniority or performance ratings helps ensure objectivity and fairness when making decisions about which employees you're going to keep and which employees you're going to let go. And I think that's what Meg really described, helping leaders slow down the rush to act and make sure the rationale is, clear, consistent, and non-discriminatory.
This is amazing. I don't know about everyone else, but I'm trying to quickly take notes of all of the great info as it's coming in. So we will make sure we get it all out to you, everyone, because this is some valuable stuff. But we all know it. Leaders like to move quickly. And sometimes even that on tough decisions like layoffs and promotions. So Jen, how can you see data help HR slow that process down in a constructive way?
Yeah, thanks, Katie. That's such an important point, and I think data gives us really like a neutral, evidence-based way to say, let's pause and make sure we've thought through the optics and risks here, right? For example, if leadership is planning a layoff, data allows us to ask, what's the rationale and can we prove this decision was made on a consistent, non-discriminatory grounds? And that framing takes it out of the realm of like personal opinion and puts it into business logic. And honestly, I think most leaders appreciate when HR helps them avoid blind spots because no one wants to end up, with a lawsuit, a morale crisis, or reputation hit that could have been avoided.
Yeah, absolutely. So something you mentioned there, Melissa also mentioned, you both mentioned the power of pairing numbers with stories. So how do you combine those in practice?
Yeah, and I couldn't agree more with what Melissa said. And it was so helpful to hear some stories from her past and how she's used that to her advantage and kind of gotten a different response to maybe the same question. But data on its own can feel cold, but I think stories. Stories on their own can feel subjective, right? So both on their own maybe aren't as strong, but together, they create a more powerful tool to use when you're talking to leaders. So, for example, Melissa talked about turnover before. So instead of just saying, our turnover rate is 18%, like she said, what does that mean to people? Again, what that's costing us X amount of dollars annually and a lost productivity and training. And on the ground, our customer support team has been running short staff for months, which has meant longer wait times and declining satisfaction scores. And that data shows scale and the story makes it real. And in terms of pay equity, I might show leadership a pay equity analysis that reveals compression issues in a specific department. The numbers prove the pattern. Then I'll tell the story of two employees with nearly identical tenure and performance, but a $6,000 pay gap, and how that inequity has started to surface in engagement survey comments. Suddenly it's not just numbers on a chart, it's risk to morale and retention. And with engagement and retention, if an engagement survey results show that 40% of employees don't see a career path at the company, I'll pair that with the story of a strong performer who left for a competitor because they couldn't envision growth here. The data shows it's a widespread issue. The story shows that human impact. With succession planning, back to that 9-box tool I mentioned earlier, I might say, here's the grid that maps where our leaders fall today. Notice we only have one person in that high potential, high performance box. That tells us we don't have enough bench strength for leadership transitions, right? Then I try to connect that to a story. Maybe, the last time a director left and how long it took us to fill that role, the strain it put on the team and what it cost us in lost productivity. And then in terms of layoffs and restructuring, if I might show a decisional matrix with objective criteria like that performance scores and seniority. Then I'd bring in that story of how in a prior restructuring decisions made without data led to the loss of a critical skill set and months of scrambling to backfill it. And the numbers show fairness and defensibility, and the story illustrates the consequences of not using them. So the formula is, data earns you the credibility, the story drives the point home, and together they just really resonate both with the head and the heart. And that's often what shifts leaders from just hearing us to acting on our recommendations.
Amazing. Yeah. And so what would be your recommendation, or what's one step HR leaders can take tomorrow to start using data more effectively?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and sometimes I feel like it feels like we have to do everything at once, right? But that's usually not going to work out so well, right? So just start small and be consistent. Even simple tracking like quarterly turnover trends, time to fill, or engagement scores builds trust when you share it regularly. And I want to connect this back to what Melissa said about, the framing the HR as a business driver again. The HR metrics that resonate most with leadership are the ones that tie directly to the business outcomes, right? So she talked about, the risk, profitability, risk mitigation, growth readiness, and retention of key talent. If you can connect the dots between an HR metric and a business goal, you're going to get leaders' attention more likely. So, for example, with profitability, if turnover costs the company $800,000 annually, frame it that way, not just as a percentage, but as a as a hit to the bottom line. For risk mitigation, pay equity analysis not only shows where pay compression exists, it demonstrates how, addressing inequities reduces the risk of wage discrimination claims. That ties directly to, I think Meg's point about HR helping leaders slow down and make that those defensible, consistent decisions. If growth readiness is important, using that 9-box again to highlight whether you have enough high potential employees to support expansion. If leadership is planning to grow by 20% next year, but only 1 or 2 employees are mapped as ready for promotion, that gap is business critical. With retention of key talent, engagement data could be paired with stories about high performers leaving for competitors. As I mentioned earlier, 40% of your employees report limited career path visibility. That's both a metric and a warning signal for future retention, right? And like Melissa said earlier, numbers alone can feel cold and stories alone can feel subjective again. So when you pair them, that's when HR has that real power. So I think that would be one of my, closing things to keep in mind is that if you compare them together, you're going to have real power there. And then, of course, think about what matters most, in your industry or to your business leaders. In healthcare, that might be staffing ratios. In manufacturing, it could be like safety incident rates. In tech, it's often like time to fill for those hard to hire roles. So track the metrics that matter most to your leaders, and speaking their language will make your insights resonate. And for our payroll clients who are tuning in, I also want to highlight that iSolved has some built-in dashboards where you can track KPIs, monitor termination trends, and pull reports that put your HR data right at your fingertips. And it's a great way to get started without adding extra systems. And I think at MP, we help clients do exactly that. We not only run engagement surveys and provide average, net promoter scores to measure loyalty as part of those surveys, but our HR partners act as a sounding board to help prioritize which data points are most relevant to your goals. And over time, when you consistently bring both, the numbers and the narrative, leaders will come to rely on you as the person who ties HR strategy directly to those business outcomes. And I think that's when your, seat at the table really will become influential.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's amazing. So I don't know about you all, but we've been given a ton of really great information. I am super fortunate that here at MP, I get to work with these amazing HR professionals and more every day to try and create the best content out there. So I'm going to be taking all of this. You guys are going to get the recording, the presentation. It'll all be sent to you, but then I'm going to be taking this and creating some checklists, some other usable tools for you all. So if you're interested in any of those tools, please complete. I just dropped a link into the survey, our post-webinar survey. If you're interested in that, in receiving that information, drop your information in there and we'll get it to you. But we've learned today how hard, we heard how HR can earn a seat by aligning with business outcomes and how it can make it count through confidence, advisory skills, data, leveraging expertise, and so much more. Your challenge, I have a challenge for you all. I know some homework. You came today, you didn't expect it, but here it is. Pick one strategy from today's session and put it into practice within the next 30 days. So just one. I know we had a lot given to us, but we do have one Q&A question or two Q&A questions that came in. So I'm going to shoot them over. And Meg, I think this one is more directed towards what you talked about, but what's a good way to start practicing pushing back on a leader who has an idea that I disagree with? I'm scared to just dive right in.
Oh, such a smart question. And I hear you because I'm there too, and I still do sometimes. So I hear it's a great
Right
question.
off the bat.
I know,
right? There you
I
go. I love it.
I appreciate it though, right? Ready to get
Yes.
started. And absolutely, most HR professionals, even those of us who have been pretty seasoned and in leadership roles ourselves, can absolutely feel that tension at some point. And even, like mid conversation of myself, trying to challenge an idea with a leader, I'll still feel that tension, like, because it's, pushing back can sometimes feel risky and uncomfy, and we don't want to get ourselves tongue-tied and, all the things. So I hear you. The key is to absolutely be building this muscle in, much smaller, safer ways before you're in the high stakes moment where, to go back to me and Melissa's example, the leader is like, we're cutting all professional development. We don't want to see it anymore. We can't afford it. That's a pretty high stakes moment to come back and be like, well, actually, can we spend some money here? Like, that's a pretty high stakes moment. So I think there's some approaches you can take to really kind of practice this and build this muscle in a lot of smaller ways. So find some of those low stakes situations, like a leader comes and wants to set a meeting, but that meeting really interferes with another meeting that's going on that's, pretty important that we keep this, instead of just being like, yep, okay, and then rearranging the schedule of 6 other people in the background. Try talking to that leader about, hey, can we find another time to meet? Because, the sales team's meeting at that time and that's their outreach time. And it's really, really important that they are consistent in that. And so that's a pretty low stakes situation that you can start practicing that. I think, one that we kind of talked about a lot is that, bring in like an improv term, yes, and is going to be really important when talking to leaders. So, as we've discussed a lot, instead of just saying no, or even kind of just saying yes and going along with the motions, it's, I can see why that idea would work, and I understand kind of the business justification behind it. I'm also thinking about how that might affect engagement. And I just want to kind of talk about that a little bit further. And again, it kind of ties right into another one about asking questions and not just stating your opinion. We've talked, all three of us have kind of talked about that, like, don't just talk about the like gut feeling, you're like warm and fuzzies. Absolutely, you can start by asking some questions and really ease in with some really thoughtful ones, like, what's the outcome you're hoping for in changing this policy? Like, that could be
Yes.
an idea. Or even like, one thing I find a lot when working with my clients is I'm asking, did something happen that's prompting this policy change? You may not know some of the situations that went on in the background, and the leader's just like, we got to change the attendance policy. But it's like, are we changing a whole policy for one person, or is this like a systemic issue that's been happening for years? Like, what's the background? Can I just like get the full story before
Yes.
we go ahead and just dive right in? And then again, like we've talked about a lot, and all three of us did, is you just don't have to be perfect. And it's okay to slow down. It's okay to take a pause, take a step back out of a conversation. If it's, you don't have the right answers right away, that's absolutely okay. You don't have to be perfect. Even just saying, I think that I have some concerns with this. I'd really like to talk this through a little bit. I'd like to, noodle on this for a few days, and then I'd like to get back with you with some alternatives, is still a win, because you are signaling that you're taking those steps into that trusted advisor role. You're not just saying yes, you're not just saying no. So each of those kind of small, very respectful pushbacks is going to build your confidence when it comes to some of those bigger conversations and those more kind of high stake moments.
Yeah, I just gonna interject, sorry. I
Yeah.
just want to say, I used to always tell my previous HR staff, like, we all have that curious ability. So instead of like asking questions to think like you're pushing back, like, you're being curious, you're learning, you're
Yes. I
looking for
love
those
that.
blind spots. So it was just a mental switch for me when I thought about it as curiosity versus I'm really trying to be difficult here asking
Right.
questions.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, amazing. One last question and then we'll wrap it up here. I think Jen, this one is more in your area, but how do you recommend HR introduce external benchmarks without leaders feeling like we're just copying competitors?
That's a good question. Yeah, and I think the trick is how you position it. I think, you don't say we should do this because everyone else is. Instead, you could say, here's what the data shows about the market. Here's the risk to us if we don't adapt, right? Like, we're paying in the 25th percentile, and maybe you think we're paying in the 50th, right? You're not copying, you're showing leaders, the landscape and helping them to make informed choices. So that's just how I would think about it. Think about how you're positioning it to them.
Perfect and amazing. Well, thank you so much, Jen, Meg, Melissa. This was amazing. And thank you everyone who joined us today. We hope this session gave you some actionable strategies that you can implement within the next 30 days as your homework. But as I said, I get to work with these amazing individuals every day and working to create content that really we put content out there that's trying to help HR leaders and get them ahead of everything that's happening, everything that's going on. So our next webinar next month is going to be on hiring across state lines. And what does that mean for multi-state compliance? So if you're interested in that one, make sure you register and to attend that one happening next week. And as a reminder, all attendees will receive a follow-up email with today's recording, the slides, and instructions for claiming your one SHRM credit. And we'd also love your feedback at the end of today's session. So make sure take a 1 minute to do that post-webinar survey. Your input helps us improve future webinars and ensures we're covering the topics you care about the most. If you'd like content from today's session, again, that's all in the survey as well. At MP, we know you have choices when it comes to technology and HR partners. Anyone can do technology. We just do people first. We pick up the phone, we care about your business, and that's what truly sets us apart from everyone else. Our SHRM certified consultants, like the three amazing women you see here, work alongside their clients to navigate compliance, training, and the full employee lifecycle, not just the system setup. If you'd like to have a conversation, our team is here to help. And if not, we are still here to help. So on behalf of the entire MP team, thank you again for spending your time with us today, and we look forward to seeing you at our next webinar.
Yeah, thank you.
Thank you.
Bye.
Bye.